This is part 43 of ASP.NET MVC tutorial. In this video, we'll discuss hidden input and read-only attributes. Please watch part 42 before proceeding. Hidden input attribute is useful when you want to render a property using input type equals hidden. This attribute is extremely useful when you don't want the user to see or edit the property value, but you need to post that property value back to the server when the form is submitted so that we can update the correct record. This hidden input attribute is present in system.web.mvc namespace. Let's understand the use of this attribute with an example. Notice that when we navigate to details action within home controller, we can see that employee's full details, including ID property. Now let's say we don't want to allow the user to see this ID property, and at the same time we don't want to allow him to be able to change this property's value. And to achieve this, we can simply decorate the ID property within our employee class with this hidden input attribute. So we have the ID property here. I'm going to decorate this with hidden input attribute. Let's build the solution and let's refresh this view. Notice that even after the view is refreshed, we are still seeing ID property. That's because we need to tell this attribute not to display the value, and to do that we can use named property display value equals false. Let's build the solution and let's refresh this view once more. And notice that we don't see the ID property now. Now let's see if we will be able to see that property when we try to edit this employee details. Obviously the first step now is to implement the edit action method within the home controller. So here we have the edit action method. We are passing the ID of the employee that we are editing. So let me copy this code. So we are creating an instance of a sample DB context class, retrieving the employee that we want to edit, and then we pass that employee to the view. The next step is to implement the edit view itself. So let's right click on the action method, select add view from the context menu. The name of the view is going to be edit. Raise a view engine. We are going to create a strongly typed view against employee model class, and the scaffold template is going to be empty for now. Let's click add. So that should add edit view. And first of all, let's use the div tag and set style attribute. And we need to generate the form tag, and to do that I'm going to make use of begin form HTML helper, and to have the opening and closing form tags generated automatically, I'm going to wrap this call inside a using statement, and then I'm going to use this HTML.editor form model HTML helper, which is going to walk through each property and then generate the editor interface for us automatically. And then let's have two HTML breaks and then a submit button. So input type equals submit, value equals save. Alright, with all these changes, let's build the solution and let's navigate to edit /1. So we should be able to edit this employee details. Notice that we see the employee full details except the ID property. If I right click on that and view page source, notice that we have an input element, with name ID, type is equal to hidden, and look at the value 1. So when we click this save button, the ID of the employee also will be posted to the server, and we can use that ID to update the correct employee's record. The next attribute that we'll discuss today is read-only attribute. This attribute is present in system.componentModel namespace. As the name suggests, this attribute is used to make the property read-only. But please note that we will still be able to change the property value on the view itself. But once we post that form to the server, the model binder in ASP.NET will respect that read-only attribute, and it will not move the value to that property. So from the posted form values, it will not bind the value to the employee class. For example, if we decorate email address with read-only property, we will still be able to change that on the view itself, but when we submit the form, the default model binder in ASP.NET MVC will not move that value from the posted form values to the class properties. Let's actually look at that in action practically. So within our employee class, let's set this email address read only by using read only attribute. So read only, if you want that property to be read only, set that true. If you don't want that to be read only, if you want that property to be read write, simply say false. Or if you don't use that attribute, it is going to be read write. Let's build the solution. And then within home controller, we need to implement the edit action method that responds to the HTTP post operation. So we know that when we post this form to the server, we are going to receive an employee object. So I'm going to pass the employee object as the parameter. And then to speed things up, I have this edit action method code already implemented. So let me copy and paste that right here. So if you look at this code, it's very straightforward. We are checking if the model state is valid. We are creating an instance for sample DB context class, and then we are retrieving that employee which we are editing from the database. Okay, and notice that we are populating all the properties: full name, gender, age, hire date, all the properties except email address. Okay, so this employee object that's coming into this method is going to contain the values from the form. So using those values, we are populating this employee from DB object, all the properties except email address, because we don't want to pass email address. We want that email address to be read only. The default model binder, in a bit we'll see that, will put a breakpoint and then watch the values of this employee object. You'll notice that email address will be null because we decorated that property with read-only attribute. So the default model binder in MVC will not move the value for that property from this form. And then we are passing that employee from DB object to this function which is going, and then we are setting the state of that entity as modified, because obviously some values will be changed. And then we call save changes method, which is going to save the changes to the database table. And then we are redirecting to the details action, passing the ID of the employee. Pretty simple and straightforward. If there are any model validation errors, we stay on the same view and we pass the employee object. Alright, let's put a breakpoint here and let's actually run this in debug mode. And you will notice that the email address property will be null. So let's actually navigate to edit action and pass employee ID of 1, and then let's say let's change the name of John Smith from 1 to 2, gender from male 1 to male 2, and let's also change the email address johnsmith2@pragimtech.com. and then when I click save, obviously we will land in this action method. And then notice that if you look at full name, that has changed to John Smith 2, and gender has changed to male 2. But look at email address, that's null, because since we decorated in this email address property of the employee object with read-only attribute, it's not going to receive that value from the posted form. The default ASP.NET MVC model binder is going to respect that read-only attribute. Okay, but notice that on the UI, I am still able to change this value to whatever I want. And then if I let that go through, it's going to save the changes and redirect us back to the details action. So I can see John Smith 2, male 2, but email address is the same. It didn't change, johnsmith@pragimtech.com. So read-only attribute is present in system.component model namespace. As the name suggests, this attribute is used to make a property read-only. Please note that we'll still be able to change the property value on the view, but once we post that form, the model binder in ASP.NET will respect that read-only attribute and will not move the value to that property. You can also make a property of a class read-only simply by removing the set accessor. Now if you look at this property with an employee class email address. It has got both get and set accessor, meaning it's both read and write. If you remove set accessor, it's going to be read only property anyway. So there are two ways to make a property read only. You can either remove that set accessor, or you can decorate that with this read only attribute. On this slide, you can find resources for ASP.NET, C# and SQL Server interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.